Well, welcome back to Managerial Accounting. In this little video, I'm going to review the take-home part of the exam, exam number 2. So there were 5 questions, and the number of points varied. So this first one was worth 5 points, and they want us to determine the proportion usage of the janitorial department by the cafeteria, cutting, and assembly department. So if you want to get the usage here, you want to allocate the usage of the janitorial department, you would do that on the basis of square feet. And you'll see here that the cafeteria uses 20,000 square feet, cutting uses 4,000 square feet, and assembly uses 16,000 square feet. So that's the denominator when you allocate. You add up all these things. So 20,000 plus 4,000 plus 16,000. So I believe that gives you 40,000. And the amount that goes to the cafeteria is 20,000 divided by 40,000, which is 50%. The amount used by the cutting is 4,000 divided by 20,000, by 40,000 rather, which is 10%. And then the last one is 16,000 divided by 40,000, which is 40%. So there's your various ratios. It's 50%, 10%, 40%. Some of you took it a bit further and allocated all the janitorial costs, but that's not what I asked for. I asked for the usage by cafeteria, cutting, and assembly. And again, you add up all the square footage, so it adds up to 20 plus 4 plus 6 is 40,000. So it's 20,000 divided by 40,000 for cafeteria, and it's 4,000 divided by 40,000, or 10%, for cutting. And then the assembly department is 16,000 divided by 40,000, which gives you 40%. Okay, so those are your allocations there. So the answer A is 50%, B is 10%, and C is 40%. That question was worth 5 points. Next question was worth 10 points, and they gave you a bunch of information, and you had to allocate the costs on the basis of the joint costs on the basis of the net realizable value. So we had $200,000 worth of joint costs that we have to allocate them, and we have to allocate those costs on the basis of the net realizable value. So the net realizable value is given, as they said that the net realizable value for face cream was 7,500, net realizable value for lotion was 3,500, and for liquid soap it was 4,000. So you've got to add up all those totals there. So 7,500 plus 3,500 plus 4,000. I believe that is, what is that? That's 11, that's 15,000. 15,000 with the would be the net realizable values. So face cream gets 7,500 divided by 15,000, which sounds like 50% times 200,000. So they get $100,000 worth of the costs. The body lotion is 3,500 divided by the 15,000 times 20%, which gives you $46,000. And then liquid soap is 4,000 divided by 15,000 times 200,000, which gives you $54,000. So that's how you allocate the 200,000. Now, I only took off a point for this, and we said that we wanted you to round percentages and intermediate steps to the nearest whole percentage. So if some of you had fractions of percentages there, you got a different answer. And sorry, folks, when you're told to round to the nearest whole percentage, you got to now round to the nearest whole percentage. So if you lost a point there, next time pay closer instructions to the closer attention to the instructions. Okay, so that's the net realizable values, A, B, and C. Third one was pretty simple. Third one is you sell 2 products, and you've got to come up with the break even of the sales mix for products X and Y, determine the break even point in units of X and Y. So to get this composite break even point, first of all, you got to get a composite sales price. So it's 60% at 180 and 40% at 100. Then you got to get a composite variable cost. So it's 60% of 80 and 40% of 50. So that gives you a composite selling price of 148, a composite variable cost of 68. So therefore, you've got a composite unit contribution margin of $80. So if you divide the fixed cost of 160 by 80, you get 2,000 units. And now how many units of X and how many units of Y? So 2,000 times 60% of the units of product X, and 40% times 2,000 gives you 800 for unit Y. That one was worth 10 points. Third one was worth 10 points, and here was interesting. We gave you an absorption-based income statement, and then we gave you some additional information about it. It says if fifth manufacturing costs were 42,900, so included in that 85,500 was 42,900 of fixed costs, and the variable selling and administrative expenses were 14,600. So if you look at the selling and administrative expenses of 21,500, there were variable selling expenses in there of 14,600. So on the basis of what you were given and this additional information, come up with a variable costing income statement. Now, a couple of you would have gotten a note here that says format. I took off a point for format because you left some of the key categories out. So when we do I'll get to the numbers in a moment, but when we do the variable costing income statement, to get full credit, you got to show value manufacturing margin, and then you've got to show contribution margin. So remember, manufacturing margin is before variable selling and administrative expenses. So you would have had to show all the steps here on the statement. Some of you just added a bunch of numbers and you didn't put in your titles and so forth. So I took off a point for format. And then as far as where the actual numbers come from, to get the variable cost of goods manufactured, it was the fixed cost, the absorption cost of 85,500 minus the fixed costs, which were included in the manufacturing cost. So that's where I got the 42,600. So the variable cost of goods manufactured, only including the variable cost, is 42,600. Then I had to figure out what the ending inventory was of the variable costs. So if you took a look at the ending inventory, the variable cost here, you made 4,400, and your total manufacturing costs, variable manufacturing costs, were 42,600. And you sold, they told you that you had sold 2,600 units and you had 400 units in ending inventory. So you must have actually manufactured, therefore, 3,000 units. So to get my variable manufacturing cost, 42,600 divided by 3,000 gives me a variable cost per unit of 1,420. I had 400 units, so 400 times 1,420 gives me 5,680. Okay, so there's where I got the variable cost of goods manufactured minus the ending inventory. That's how I got the ending inventory of variable cost. So that gives me total variable cost of goods sold. I subtract that from sales and I get manufacturing margin. Then they told me what variable selling administrative expenses were, and that'll give me the contribution margin. So the only other thing I've got to consider now is what the fixed costs were. And they told us that fixed manufacturing costs were 42,900. And as far as the fixed selling and administrative costs, well, I know total selling administrative costs were 21,500. And I know that the variable component of that was 14,600. So therefore, I must have had 6,900 of fixed selling administrative expenses. Okay. So to get full credit for this, you had to show all the numbers. You had to show your calculations, and you had to show the various sections there. So you had to not just show contribution margin, you had to show manufacturing margin, and you had a list of selling and administrative expenses separately to get contribution margin. Right? And then the last one was the biggie. You knew this was coming. This was worth 15 points. And what I've did here, and again, to get full credit, you got to show the full statement. You can't just give me a bunch of numbers without explanation. Okay. And the tricky thing here with the cost of goods sold budget is all the different inventories. So remember, we've got finished goods, we've got work in process inventories, we've got raw materials inventories, and you have to consider these both at the beginning of the period and at the end of the period. Okay, and I said, think of this in terms of 3 columns. So we know there was finished goods, beginning inventory, and ending inventory, which I highlighted here. You know there was work in process, beginning inventory, and ending inventory, which I highlighted here. And then for direct materials, you're going to have direct materials, beginning inventory and ending inventory, which I highlighted here. So to get the full cost of goods manufactured, so first of all, you set up the two columns with the beginning inventory of finished goods, the beginning inventory work in process. Then you have to figure out how many materials were used. So this was beginning inventory of materials. Here were the purchases. That's the materials available. Here's the ending inventory of materials. So there is your material cost of 559. Add to that the labor cost, which was given. Add to that the overhead given. That gives you 987,000. Add that to your beginning work in process, and that's the total work in process this period. Subtract out the ending work in process. This is the total cost of goods manufactured. So beginning finished goods plus total cost of goods manufactured gives you the finished goods available for sale. From that, you subtract out the ending inventory of finished goods, and that'll give you your cost of goods sold. Okay, so I hope you found that review useful. Again, I noticed the pattern that most people did better on the take-home part than the multiple choice part, and you might want to remember that as you prepare for exam 3, which will be similar in format. Okay. So I hope you found that review useful, and I will see you later in class. Adios, au revoir, hasta luego.